thank you all for joining us this afternoon to talk about all things sunflowers. Before we get started, let me see if my slides will advance. Yep. So I wanted to give you an overview of kind of what we're going to be going through today as we talk about sunflowers, this species that's probably familiar to many of us. Perhaps we've been growing it for many years, decades, but I wanted to just review the Helianthus species and step back and take a look at the whole family of sunflowers. And then we'll look at some of the agricultural uses as well as horticultural uses. And then we'll look at how we can grow sunflowers ourselves, a reminder for those of us that have grown them, or a guide for those who want to grow them. And then in the end, stay tuned because we'll talk a bit about what I call sunflower superpowers. There are some things that sunflowers are capable of doing that in my mind make them even more incredible once you kind of get down into what plants, what these plants can do for us or have the ability to do. And so we'll explore those at the tail end. So let's dive in here with Helianthus species. So let's go up a level first and talk about the family. So sunflowers are part of the Asteraceae family. This is alternatively known as the Compositaceae. And this is a huge family in the plant world. It consists of over 32,000 known species and over 1,900 genera. Now, it's only rivaled in number by the Orchidaceae family. So this is one of the very largest of the plant families. And now within this family, it consists of annuals, biennials, and perennials mostly. There are some shrubs, some vines, and some trees that belong to this family as well. And this Asteraceae family have plants that are found on every continent except for Antarctica. So it's a very large extended family that the sunflowers have. Now within this family, 5 is a very powerful number. And that's partly where the word Asteraceae comes from. It's derived from the Greek word for star, which typically is depicted as having 5 points. Not all, but many of the flowers have some level of 5 exhibited within their development. So 5 petals, 5 stamen, etc. Again, some or most of them, but not all of them, would exhibit these characteristics. What they do have in common are what we call composite blooms. And let's look at what that exactly means so we understand kind of what we're talking about. So a composite bloom is a flower, and I use that term loosely here, a flower that appears as a single floral head. This is easily, we often identify this inflorescence as a single flower. The unique aspect of it, though, is that it's actually a cluster of smaller flowers that appear to be one large floral head. So in the sunflower, you can see here in the zoomed in picture that there are petals or sun rays that are individually strapped shaped flowers along the outer ring of the sunflower. And those are sometimes called ray flowers. And then there's the sun disk. And these are also individual flowers that make up those discs. And those are called disc flowers or disc florets. And so one apparent sunflower is actually many smaller individual flowers. The Helianthus species, the genus, the genus was named by Carl Linnaeus, and it's derived from the Greek words from helios and anthos, which is sun, flower. So a pretty direct translation into sunflower. And it is said to come from the heliotropic nature of the plant. And now some plants do this. Sunflower is not the only plant that exhibits heliotropic characteristics, but it is probably one that we've all observed and paid attention to, even if we don't know the name of this characteristic. So a heliotropic plant has adapted qualities within its cellular structure to actually track the sun. So it means that it is going to rotate throughout the day following the sun. Now, the apex of the plant is most sensitive to light, and so the leaves prior to the bloom will do this as well. But it is most noticeable, of course, when those flowers emerge and they rotate throughout the day, starting from the east and kind of following the sun to the west. And you can see in this photo a whole field doing that is quite a stunning sight. Now, Helianthus is a native species, or is a native genus to North America. The Helianthus that we are most common or most familiar with is Helianthus annuus, and this is the annual sunflower or the common sunflower. This is the one that we have done the most breeding with, and we'll talk primarily about throughout this presentation. But I want to just make sure that we noted that this is the annual sunflower. It is multi-branching in its original form, and there have been many hybrids that have come from it. Not to be left out would be perennial sunflowers. These are also Helianthus species. And there are many perennial sunflowers native to North America and available to be planted in your landscape if you are looking for a perennial sunflower to grow. I put rhizomatous on here as a special note to call out that while Helianthus annuus spreads by seed, it's an annual plant, and so it reseeds every year, and it can be prolific when it reseeds. The native perennial sunflowers, many of them will spread by rhizome, which means they can colonize an area, and sometimes in a more managed landscape or without the competition that they would have typically found in a native or natural habitat, can be on the aggressive side. Let's just say they can take over a little bit or spread with some vigor. And so keep that in mind. Not a reason in my perspective to discount them. It's just something to consider when you're choosing a perennial sunflower, and then also developing your management plan. Now, if you have a variety of different sites that you're planting, or you're looking for something that's not going to be the annual, that would fit different environmental conditions, and you want to do a perennial sunflower. Within this species, you can basically find whatever you're looking for. And these are just 3 examples to exhibit the breadth that is available in the Helianthus species. And so we have the woodland sunflower, and that's the one that's depicted here. This is suitable for open and dry woodlands or savanna type landscapes. And this resembles a lot of other sunflower species. You can see it's a pretty familiar composite floral display. These are rhizomatous, and they will spread vigorously, and it tops out around 4 feet in height. Now, this plant, unlike kind of the name implies, will actually tolerate part to full shade. So it doesn't really require that full sun exposure. So that might be a consideration for a more shady part of your landscape. Now we have the showy sunflower, which is also called stiff sunflower or prairie sunflower. Now this is great for dry soils and full sun prairies. It can be an indicator species of really high quality dry prairie remnants. Now this plant will reach about 5 feet in height. It has narrow leaves, which is a bit contrasting to some of our really large, robust leaves produced by other sunflowers. And showy sunflower is a host to the Gorgon checker spot, which is a butterfly that is restricted to high quality prairie remnants. And so you can plant for pollinators while you're planting these sunflowers. And then finally, we've got sawtooth sunflower. Now this one is quite large compared to the 2 we just talked about. It can grow up to 12 feet, but it can grow in really dense colonies that then can stunt the growth of it and keep it more restricted at around 5 feet. Now this sunflower does well in full sun, but more moist soils with high organic matter. And so you can kind of see there's a breadth of site conditions that the Helianthus species can tolerate if you choose the right one. Now, agricultural products, I wanted to just visit kind of what role sunflowers have played within our global economy. I think this is fascinating. And so sunflowers, of all the crops cultivated for seed, sunflower is the only one that was domesticated, that is native to North America and domesticated in America. Now, quick review of some of the other seed crops off the top of our head. So let's go through like corn. This one is native to Mexico and was domesticated in Mexico. Beans are of the Andes mountains of Peru and then also Mexico. Squash is in Central America and Mexico. Wheat would be from Turkey or the Middle East. Rice would have been domesticated in Asia, Africa, or South America. And so sunflowers have that, that home status of being of and from North America. And it is believed that the sunflower was domesticated in 1000 BCE in the Western United States. So cultivation of sunflower began with indigenous cultures. Now, many did this, it being a widespread plant. Many indigenous cultures cultivated sunflower for use as a food crop. Now, relatively close to us would be the Cahokia mound builders. They are the first to use the crop in the Midwest thousands of years ago. Now, if you're not familiar with the Cahokia mound builders, this is an indigenous people that lived in areas east of present-day Collinsville or St. Louis between 900 and 1200 AD. Now, trade with these folks, so the remnants and the evidence that they left behind indicates that this was a hub, a trade hub for indigenous cultures from the Gulf of Mexico all the way up to Lake Superior, to Southern Appalachia. So lots of trade, lots of commerce happening in and around this area. What that means is that people needed to be fed. There needed to be some sort of sustenance grown and available for people that were visiting this area or living in this area. Now, corn was in surplus and was a driving force, but there's evidence that these, the Cahokia Nation was cultivating, they were early farmers. They were cultivating crops, including squash, sunflowers, lamb's quarter, in addition to corn. Now, a side note, when lamb's quarter caught my eye in the research, I thought, well, that is interesting because lamb's quarter to me is a weed. I pull it out of my garden and it's frustrating. But so I was curious how they use it. And actually the seeds were used in sort of a way that quinoa is used today, like a seed, and which makes sense if you've ever let a lamb's quarter go to flower and seed. They were using it as that. And so again, a little deeper appreciation for a plant that I see regularly and didn't know that about. Now, as happened in North America, European settlers came through and settled in Middle America, Middle North America, and observed that sunflower crops were being used by Native people as a food source. But they collected seeds, took it back to Europe, and sort of ignored that use of the plant and used sunflowers. They became highly prized as ornamental plants as well as for medicinal purposes. But agriculture was not top of mind or use for sunflowers in Europe at that time. Until about the early 1800s, as the Russian Orthodox Church issued a ban on traditional fatty foods for the duration of Lent, such as butter, lard, and olive oil. This created an opportunity for sunflower oil to fill a niche, and it did. Keep in mind, during this time period, the Russian Orthodox Church had a lot of power. It was the leading decision-making body. And so by issuing this decree, this ban on fatty foods during Lent, it had a big impact on the lives of everybody, in Europe and in Russia, what is now present-day Russia. So now having butter, lard, olive oil, fatty foods removed from your diet, you still need fatty foods to cook, to make things taste good, to have a healthy, balanced diet. This led to the cultivation and hybridization of sunflowers, which were not banned as a food product, to being developed for improved oil quality and quantity. So just better quality oil out of sunflowers and more of it. And so we started seeing the sunflower emerge as a crop once again. Now, Ukraine, having a complicated political history with the Russian Empire, that remains today, inherited the crop and is continued to grow today. Now, the sunflower is the national flower of Ukraine. And the country continues to be the #1 exporting nation for sunflower oil. And so, that's why you would see, sunflowers being represented, nowadays with the war occurring. Sunflowers are a significant cultural and agricultural and economic component of the Ukrainian country. So now, completing the circle, sunflowers returned to America and were first commercially processed in 1926. Well, it was slow to take off, and now in the early 1970s, sunflowers started to become agriculturally grown product. And so now today, the leading states for acreage with sunflowers is North Dakota, followed by South Dakota and Nebraska. So we said oil is what was primarily, sunflowers were primarily bred for. Well, it's still that today. 70 to 80% of the crop of sunflowers grown worldwide is for sunflower oil. Now, let's talk about the oil just a little bit. So through breeding programs, the cultivars developed had an increased level of what is called oleic oil. And so this type of oil is a fatty, has fatty acids that contribute to oil stability. Without getting too into the weeds of nutrition, what oil stability does is it increases the smoke point, or it increases the ability for the oil to maintain its stability at higher temperatures. What that means for us in lay terms is that it's really useful for frying things. And so today you'll see sometimes, if you take a look at your potato chip bag, you turn it over, and sometimes it will actually call out sunflower oil as being one of the ingredients. And that is because it can, it will not turn rancid, or it will not go bad at those higher temperatures that are required for frying foods. And just a real quick little tidbit about how you actually get the oil out of the sunflower seeds. So there are two processes that are used. The one pictured here is the hard press method, and this is actually an olive oil press. I could not find one of sunflowers, but it's the same basic principle, which is that using high pressure on the seed head, you just squish out the oil and separate it from the solids of the seed and extract that oil. This can achieve approximately 25% of the oil being harvested from the seeds. The second method is a pre-pressed solvent extraction method, which uses a medium pressure, but there is also a solvent in this process that helps to separate the oil from the seeds. And this can help harvest about 40% of the oil out of the seed heads. So now you have these de-oiled sunflower meal, which is a byproduct of harvesting oil from the sunflower seeds. And it can be put to use. Some of the uses for these de-oiled sunflower seeds is used as livestock feed. Now, it needs to be used in supplement with other types of feed because it is high in fiber, low in protein at this point. And so it's not often used as a solo source of nutrition for animals, but as a component of it. Forage is sometimes, sunflowers are sometimes used as forage material. So there's a lot of plant material produced from sunflowers. Many of you might have noticed that. They put on a lot of plant growth, a lot of green growth for the flower heads. And so this large amount of biomass can be a reasonable resource for silage materials. And it can also be used after oil extraction. So kind of forage can come in kind of two different forms. And then finally, sunflowers can be used as a cover crop and have been used as a cover crop. There's a couple of benefits of using sunflowers as cover crops in no particular order. One of the reasons would be that they look good. This is one of the most beautiful options for cover crops, especially if you're able to let it go to flower. The neighbors might like it. But it's also a really good source for pollinators. And so if it's able to produce floral resources, then pollinators benefit from that cover crop as well. Again, there's a lot of biomass produced, and so it can help with adding organic matter into the soil, as it would be chopped and then allowed to decompose onto the site. And then finally, it can help with compacted soils or soil compaction. There's a large taproot that is produced by sunflowers, and that can help break up some of the compaction on sites, as well as a robust fibrous root system. So all working to break up the soil structure and build, minimize that compaction. So horticultural uses. So birdseed is probably familiar to many of us. The birdseed is a multi-billion-dollar a year industry. And so several hundred thousands of acres of sunflowers are grown for the purposes of harvesting those seeds for birdseed. Now, these are not your real, your giant sunflower seeds that maybe we buy at the ballpark. These are the thinner hulled black oil seed types, and that's because they are easier for birds to consume. And so there's some variety in what types of sunflowers we're planting for what purpose. And then also cut flowers. So in the early 1990s, sunflowers were sort of a fad. I remember having sunflowers, the image of sunflowers on a variety of different products, from clothing to home decor. While that has faded a bit from fashion, the sunflower as a cut flower has not. It is still to this day the most common cut flower in the world. And so what that has led to is that breeding programs have worked to reduce the pollen content that are produced by sunflowers that are meant to be harvested as cut flowers. Sunflowers produce a robust amount of pollen, which is great for pollinators, except when you want to use sunflowers as a cut flower or sell them as a commodity. That pollen becomes a hindrance. It makes a mess on things, and it can stain. And so through breeding programs, there have been a reduction of pollen production within some of the cultivars. And so now, hopefully, all these pictures, this background has convinced you to plant more sunflowers, or to plant some sunflowers if you've never planted sunflowers before. But there are some decisions that you need to make, because sunflowers come in, like we already discussed, annual or perennial. But then there's the decision of branching or non-branching. So branching sunflowers are like the ones that are pictured here, where a plant produces a large variety or a large quantity of blooms over a long period of time. They require much more space than the non-branching sunflowers, and the floral displays are often smaller. So you get more but smaller sunflowers. Now, if you chose a non-branching sunflower, these are the one and done sunflowers that I think are more familiar to many of us. They produce just one bloom, and then it is spent. Many flower farmers do choose to produce the non-branching. And another decision that you would need to make is, what is the purpose of your sunflower planting? Are you planting for pollinators and the use by bees? Or are you trying to produce flowers for cutting, which is where your decision for pollen or pollenless would be influenced. And then your plant, or the head and plant size. So sunflowers range, come in a wide range of sizes. They can, vary from 2 feet in size, which would be a plant that you would want to put at like the front of a planting bed or in a planter, up to, some of those very large, very large seed heads, very large plants, upwards of 30 feet was the world record for a plant. Now I haven't ever seen one that reached 30 feet, but I've seen them upwards of 18 feet. And so choosing which size of plant and size of floral head you are desiring and have space for can make a big difference as to what seeds you're planting. And then finally, color. Now, if you're unfamiliar with sunflowers today, I'm so glad you're joining us, because sunflowers have come a long ways from the traditionally yellow blossoms. Well, let's talk about that in a little more depth. So these breeding programs, especially for cut flowers, have resulted in a wide range of flower colors being available. Everything from yellow, white, plum, or multicolored. are available. So things, and they have fun names too. Of course, horticulturists like to name things in fun or descriptive ways. And so a few cultivars you might consider. Theirs is certainly not a full list, but would be like within the yellow family. They range from things that are more lemon in color, and there's a pro-cut lemon, to things that are, or to blooms that are more orangish or a really rich yellow color. So Solano double has a double blossom, so there's a lot more of those ray petals produced than the ray or the disc flowers. So it's an exaggerated kind of a fluffy type of blossom. Gummy bear is another one, but that's smaller in size. There's Sunrich Summer Provenance, there's Sonia, Pro-Cut Peach, all the yellow flowers that are available with a wide range of shades of yellow. White, there are a couple of ones that I like to grow. One is called White Night, and the other is called White Light. Now, again, there's some range within the white sunflowers of petal color, but White Night and White Light, I grow them because the disc flowers actually have changed color. One is a lighter color and one is a darker color, which can give nice variety to your bouquet when you're cutting these flowers. Plum or red sunflowers can be really stunning. You can see in my photo here that there's a couple in there that have some of those red undertones. Pro-cut red, strawberry blonde, or red hedge are some of the cultivars available. And there's multicolored, so you don't have to just pick a color. You can choose a sunflower that has a multitude of colors in it. So things like bicolor, Florenza, Ring of Fire, or Firecracker are all bicolored sunflowers that are available. And now there's one that's not pictured here or listed here, but it is, there are some cultivars that are emerging that have exaggerated sepals, which is actually not the blossom at all. It's some modified leaves that would help protect the bloom. And these are really unique, interesting sunflowers. One is called Sunfill Purple. And they would, in the chat, I would be curious if anybody has grown those and what your thoughts are. I have not, and I am still curious as to how I would like those in real life. All right. So then, like I've mentioned here, a couple of times, like different cultivars. I have mentioned Pro-Cut series. There's a Sunrich series, Vincent series. A lot of this is marketing. It's trademark types of things. But many times, like Pro-Cut, they're all pollenless. They're billed as pollenless, single stem and multicolored. They are all relatively the same size. So one way to make your planting decisions or your management of sunflowers easier, if you're indecisive like I am, which is to buy Pro-Cut seeds in some of the different colors and then mix them all together, and then you're surprised as you plant your succession plantings. You're just surprised each bloom period as to what you get. Sunrich has pollenless single stems, but they're all kind of in the yellowish family. And then Vincent is also pollenless. And now there's individual cultivars that are not part of these series. There's nothing wrong with them. They're wonderful as well. It just is how they're listed and they exist within the seed catalogs. And also keep in mind that this breeding continues to go on. It is expanding and evolving, and there's always something new. And so I encourage you to subscribe to different catalogs, to search online, to try different things, because it's always evolving. So actually growing sunflowers, they're pretty easy to grow, which I think is why many of us love them so much, is that they just need full sun. They need a certain amount of space available. We've already talked about the wide range of sizes that are available, and you would certainly not want to put one of your very tall species or one of your very tall cultivars in the front of your planting bed, where it would hide everything behind it eventually. And in terms of soil conditions, they don't need much in terms of special soil conditions. pH of 6 to 7.2 is optimum. There's usually not a lot of worry if you're outside of that pH range. To plant sunflowers, they're a warm season crop, which means that they are susceptible to late season frosts. And so you would want to plant your sunflowers as soon as the threat of frost has passed and the soil has warmed, but not too late in the season, when you are risking a late or a fall frost that's going to prevent you from enjoying those blossoms to their fullest extent. Sunflowers are about 100-day crop, and where I'm at in Northern Illinois, we have 170 to 190 growing days, kind of depending on the year. So you can get succession plantings for quite a few weeks and extend your harvest. So you can direct seed or transplant sunflowers. Direct seed is really easy because the seeds are quite large and you can see them well. If they are viable seeds, if they're healthy, fresh seeds, germination occurs within a few days, which is really nice for impatient gardeners. Bird predation can occur with these seeds because they like eating sunflowers. And so if you do direct seed and you have some bird predation challenges or concerns, you would want to protect those seedlings until they're about 3 to 4 inches in size. And that can be done with a frost cloth or a caterpillar tunnel. You can put some netting over top of them and then remove once those plants have grown to a size large enough where the birds will leave them alone. Planting depth depends on the thickness of the seeds, but as a general rule of thumb, you would plant 2 times the thickness of the seeds. So for sunflowers, approximately 1/2 inch to 1 inch into the soil would be just fine, and you would cover it. Orientation. I've had this question, which is the right side, stick up or down with the sunflowers, because they do have kind of a pointed end and a rounded end. And the wonderful thing about sunflowers is that you can lay them flat. There's no right side up or right side down. They will correct themselves when they germinate. And so lay them in the soil and provide adequate water to get them to germinate, and you will be just fine. This also makes them really easy and fun to plant with kids, because that quick germination, they're easy to see their plants growing really quickly. You can see them in the ground, so if they drop a whole pile of them, you can spread them out if you want, or let them grow. You can also, they're not too particular in terms of how deep they go. There's a little bit more forgiveness in sunflowers and other plants, and so they're good for planting with children. So fertilizer, they don't need a lot of fertilizer, especially once they're established. They tolerate pretty poor soil conditions. They don't require much in terms of additional or supplemental fertilizer. And it is actually recommended that if you feel compelled to provide fertilizer, do a soil test. Because if you are providing too much nutrients to sunflowers, you're going to get a robust, even more robust plants at the sacrifice or at the detriment of that bloom. You would just put on a lot of biomass instead of achieving what you were probably going for, which would be the blossoms. And then if you're growing sunflowers as cut flowers, this is when you would harvest. This picture here shows them when they're just starting to begin to open, just unfurling a little bit. You want to harvest the blooms at this very first petal unfurl. And then you would want to remove the bottom leaves to prolong vase life. So you would take the leaves off of that stem and put it into a vase. Preservative is not usually needed to help prolong the vase life of sunflowers. Red blooms, I have heard anecdotally, will not last as long as the yellow blooms or any of those cultivars that have that some sort of red hue in them. And when I say they won't last as long, it means that the floral head will droop when they are used as cut flowers, and that can be corrected by supporting them with some floral wire and stringing it through just to prop up that seed or that floral head, which seems to get kind of heavy for those red blossoms. And then pests and diseases. So sunflowers don't have a lot of pest issues. If there are pests that are chewing on your sunflowers, it's usually a cosmetic issue. It's usually not going to be fatal to your sunflowers. So that's it's cosmetic. There are some fungal issues that can occur with sunflowers. This is usually able to be managed with by avoiding overwatering, overcrowding, and then also doing a crop rotation. So not planting your plants too close together, not watering too much. They don't really like wet, soggy soils. Keeping water off the leaves of the sunflowers when you do provide supplemental water. And then also from each year rotating your crops from site to site, and so you're not continually growing sunflowers on the same site over and over again. Okay, so sunflower superpowers. Let's get into this part, because I think, like I said at the beginning, this is what really got me excited about sunflowers beyond their beauty. So we know that bees and pollinator populations are facing and have faced a variety of threats in our modern day landscape. What this looks like is different from site to site, but some of the general categories include pesticide exposure, which can harm populations, climate change, the loss of habitat, and like all living things, there are some illnesses and pathogens that can cause fatality or declined vigor and health of pollinator populations. And this is what we're talking about today, where sunflowers come into the conversation. So there is bumblebees feed on sunflower pollen, and there is an intestinal parasite called Crithidia bombi, which is a single-celled organism. It takes up residence in the bee's gut or the bee's intestine, and can cause a weakened immune system. It can shorten their viability. So this is concerning, especially considering our bee populations are already under threat. Scientists have hypothesized why sunflower pollen seems to help mitigate the impacts of Crithidia bombi on bumblebees. Some of the hypotheses, reasonable, would be that did it boost the bee's immune system? That's been a question that's been asked. Or perhaps the pollen was fatal to the parasite directly. All of this needs to be tested. New research just recently published in the Journal of Insect Physiology offers a fun explanation, which is that when bumblebees consume sunflower pollen, it makes bumblebees poop more, is how the lead author phrased it. So it's flushing out their system, which by flushing out the intestinal tract of bumblebees is removing the parasite. And so therefore it's not able to cause such challenges to the bumblebees' overall health. So sunflowers are medicine, particularly to bumblebees, and we're still working to understand why, but they're helping to support bumblebee populations. And then there's the hyperaccumulating characteristics that sunflowers offer. Now, sunflowers are a type of plant that is called a hyperaccumulator, and this means that it's capable of absorbing heavy metals into their plant materials at levels greater than quote unquote normal plants would do. Now these compounds are accumulated in the leaves, the shoots, flowers, and fruits of the plants, any hyperaccumulating plants, without causing a phytotoxic effect. And so sunflowers are part of this group. Other hyperaccumulators that you may or may not be familiar with would be members of the Brassicaceae family, especially Indian mustard has been shown to be highly useful in contaminated sites with like lead and radioactive cadmium. Willow, so their salix species, can help with lead, nickel, mitigation. There's also poplar trees, Populus deltoides, Indian grass, Sargassum nutans, which is a native grass in the tall grass prairie ecosystem. And this has been shown to help remediate petroleum hydrocarbons and is able to detoxify some of the common agricultural residues such as pesticides and herbicides. So really interesting potential applications for these plants. Now, why do they do this? It seems like an odd evolutionary characteristic, right? Well, the theory is, and this is not conclusive, but we're hypothesizing again, that this function of hyperaccumulation has something to do with an elemental defense mechanism. And so, plainly stated, it might change the flavor or the taste of plants to potential predators, herbivores, which would make it a less desirable plant to consume than others. Again, this needs to be tested out, but it's an interesting brain teaser as to why some plants would do this versus others not having these capabilities. And now, what is the application of this? Why do we care? Well, sunflowers and some of the previously mentioned plants have been used, and there's interest and growing interest and investment in exploring these plants for use as site remediation methods. And so cleaning up contaminated environmental sites. The use of these sites can help clean up cadmium, nickel, zinc, lead, radioactive materials. There's been some use of sunflowers and some different sites that have radioactive materials in the soils. There's variability in the use of cultivars of sunflowers. So Chernobyl was one of the first examples where sunflowers were used to do some site remediation, seemed to be relatively effective. Now at Fukushima recently, sunflowers were used with the success rates being less than what had been exhibited at Chernobyl. Understanding that dynamic is still ongoing. But I think the takeaway, is that these plants have been used and have been shown to have potential when we're looking at sites that have some of these really harsh chemicals, harsh metals into the soils. Now, it's not all sunshine and roses. Just a few things that we want to make sure that we note and keep in mind when we're getting really excited about using plant materials for site remediation would be that there is the matter of biomaterials to deal with. So like I had said earlier, the plants would take these materials up into their biomass, which means that then the biomass is contaminated. And so there would need to be some sort of process for disposing of the either radioactive or the heavy metal contaminated biomaterials. And there are processes that are being developed and being used to do that. Oh, excuse me, got excited there, go back. And so just one of the things that needs to be considered when we're looking at plant material for site remediation. The potential is that this can be a huge cost savings. It's easier, or it's less expensive to plant plants on a landscape, even if you're having to deal with that biomaterial year after year. There's a high potential for cost savings versus having machines in there, having people working in contaminated sites and whatnot. And so there's a lot of potential. And then, like I had said earlier, there is that issue of variability in cultivars, but as history has shown, sunflowers react well to breeding programs, and we have bred sunflowers to have a higher oil content. Perhaps in the future, we will have sunflowers or other plants that are bred specifically for their ability to do hyperaccumulating activities and site remediation. So with that, I thank you for joining our 4 seasons presentation today. I hope that you plant some sunflowers or love the sunflowers that you're already growing even more, because you have a greater appreciation for or greater understanding for those hidden potentials that those plants have. Are there any questions to look at?
Amazing. Thank you so much, Emily. I learned a bunch of new things about sunflowers that I didn't know, especially like all that historical context. Thanks for putting a new spin on it. and teaching us about sunflowers.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put in the link the evaluation for Emily's presentation this afternoon. If you could follow the link in the chat or use the QR code that's on the screen, you can use your smartphone, open the photo taking icon, and take the evaluation right on your phone, or just follow the link in the chat. Thank you so much. Emily, it didn't actually look like there were any questions in the chat. If anyone has any questions, you can please put them in the chat right now. We can hang out for a few minutes if you have questions or want clarification on some of the things that Emily mentioned. But otherwise, just lots of thank yous. People found the information really interesting, fun, you know, a different kind of presentation, but still had useful information in it. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, and I particularly love sunflowers, so I'm glad that everyone was able to explore this plant with me.
Yeah, earlier in the presentation, you asked if folks had grown the cultivars that you mentioned, and Pat mentioned that they had grown it and they found it as beautiful as the green ones. And so people are growing them out there. Meredith does have a question. Do you personally have any recommendations for more reading materials about sunflowers? Maybe information about that article that you mentioned?
Yeah, so I guess if you want to learn more about the cultivars, I would recommend getting all of the plant catalogs, looking at all the websites, all of the breeding programs. A lot of seed dealers are putting out just really good information about what the cultivars will look like or how they will do for you, the sizes, the colors, the number of days to flower. So that would be for growing them. Then if you want to get really nerdy, get into some of the research, I'll go ahead and I can send you actually some of those articles and some of those published research studies that I cited. Just shoot me an email. There's my email address. It is emerging. There's not a lot of studies that are peer reviewed and confirmed, like replicated studies for these. But I think that, especially with the interest in the uses, bioremediation, I'm hopeful that there's going to be a lot more coming on. Then third, in terms of just cut flowers, there's a lot of books and a lot of resources for just growing cut flowers, sunflowers being included because they're the top priority or the top selling cut flowers. So it kind of depends on what angle you're looking at, but that would be some of the places that I would start.
Great, thanks. So Meredith, Emily's email address is on the screen right now. So please jot that down. If you're interested in any of those articles, you can email her directly.